Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Ankur Patel. And today I have a special guest with me. I have Raja Shankar, who's the Vice President of Machine Learning at IQVIA. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ankur. Very glad to be here.
Would love to initially start with just your journey, how you got to where you are today. And then if you could tell us a little bit more about your company, that would be great.
Absolutely, Ankur, I can. Mine is an unusual journey to get to where I'm here today. I tried to do a PhD twice. Both times I did not succeed. The first time was in India, where I just graduated from architecture, and I thought I'll do a PhD to use AI for building design. And that was in the late 1990s, so completely wrong time, wrong place. So couldn't do that. And now I'm in the place where with generative AI, we can actually use AI to do different kinds of design. So in the middle, my journey took me in different places. I worked at the World Bank. I worked as a strategy consultant, including at the Boston Consulting Group with IQVIA for the last 14 years. But initially, I worked as a strategy consultant, but then I got bit by the AI bug again about 5 years ago. And then I pivoted and I retrained myself to actually do coding, to write machine learning programs, understand the underlying mathematics of like transformers. And then I have been building a capability within the company, a team that brings together life sciences domain expertise, machine learning, coding knowledge, as well as understanding of data on a journey to transform life sciences and healthcare with AI.
That's incredible. And one thing we constantly hear is that healthcare has a lot of problems where machine learning in particular could be a really great solution, right? And one of the things that keeps coming up is drug discovery. We hear a lot about it, that it's a
Yeah.
very expensive endeavor. Machine learning is very helpful in that process. And it's obviously leading to huge bets being made in biotech, right? Betting on machine learning and what it means for the future of drug discovery. So I'm curious, like, what are all the ways that you're seeing machine learning being used in pharma? And maybe because there was so much to cover there, maybe let's just highlight some of the latest things that you're very excited about moving ahead.
I think we are still at the early stages of using AI for this drug discovery. There has been a lot of talk about this, especially in terms of using AI to find new indications for existing assets or matching like molecules to biological targets to ensure that we find the right matches, both in terms of efficacy and safety. However, while the promise has been there, we really haven't seen yet at scale the discovery and development of new molecules all the way end to end. But the promise is growing because today it's not just about finding new indications for existing targets or finding matches between molecules and targets, but there is also the possibility with generative AI to design new molecules. So there's a lot of excitement in this area. We have also seen things like AlphaFold that can find protein function based on protein structures. Lots of exciting things, but still early days we have for finding molecules that go all the way from the what we call in silico to in vivo testing and to be actually in practice.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think there's a lot of net new that can be done through machine learning, still early days. But at the same time, I think the other thing we hear, of course, as pioneering as all of that is that there are also many, what I would say is simpler problems in some ways,
Yeah,
involving existing processes that perhaps require reviewing documents or making decisions, that are slowing down basically the healthcare industry, right? Because it's taking
yeah.
too much of people time to do, and artificial intelligence is being viewed as the solution for problems like that, particularly in the area of clinical decision support.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if that problem resonates with you, and if so, how far along are companies in adopting newer technology to help
Yeah.
with those problem areas?
I think there are many areas where we are making progress and where the progress is faster. So even if I took the drug discovery and development, while designing new molecules is difficult, but looking at existing molecules and looking at existing clinical trial designs and using AI and machine learning to predict the outcome of those trials, right? So are they likely to get scientifically successful? Are they likely to get regulatory approval? Are they likely to get reimbursement approval? These things are more tractable and are being done today to help companies make better clinical trial design decisions, better evidence development decisions. So that's one area where AI is helpful, and also in the short term we can use this to get better results. The points that you raised, especially productivity improvements, right? I think there's a huge potential there because we spend a lot of time when we are doing clinical trials, development, in collecting data, in processing data, in preparing trial protocols, in preparing clinical research reports, in preparing regulatory dossiers, in fact, editing documents, editing dossiers, all of these things. This takes time. So this is one area where we can compress the time significantly and improve the quality of the documentation and the analysis that is being done. So this I see is a huge promise that could actually be delivered in the short time frame. And many companies, and including many startups, are already working on this area.
Mhm. What makes this such a hard problem? I mean, I imagine part of it is the variety of documents that need to be considered, right? Patient
Yeah,
data, medical literature, treatment
yeah,
guidelines, some of which change over time. But what I've seen and heard, I'm curious what your thoughts are here, is that sometimes it's just even as simple as how do you get connected and integrated with the different data streams to be able to actually apply some of the newer technology, for example, machine learning and AI and generative AI to these data streams in order to go in and help make
yeah.
decisions. But based on your experience, but where do companies get stuck?
I think this is a very good question, Ankur, because people think sometimes because you have ChatGPT or you have the large language models, generating these documents are easy, and tomorrow you will have an application that does all of this stuff. And we have been working on this uh, quite a bit, and there are many different challenges that you need to overcome before you have a fully functional system deployed at scale to generate the right content. Absolutely correct. One of the challenges is connecting data. So we can have data from clinical trials, we could have data from publications like PubMed and other sources. And the same molecule or the same concept may be mentioned in different data sources, but with different names. Yes, there are approaches to connect this with AI across data sources, but it takes some time and effort to be able to do that. Second thing is when you are actually asking it to write a document or write a section of a document, you need to do the prompt engineering to be able to do it. But that prompt engineering or the prompting actually requires domain expertise. If you do not know what document you want or what section you want to write, you will not be able to provide the right prompt or the right question. So it's not going to be able to do that appropriately. People think sometimes if you just have the data scientists, they can do it. You can't. You need the domain experts and the data scientists working together to make it happen. And then the third challenge, which we have, and we have looked at this when we write, say, reimbursement dossiers or other documents, or people think about systematic literature reviews as another example, right? So you may know the end template. This is how I want the document to come out, and these are the sections. You might even have the expertise to uh, do the right prompting. You might be able to also have different agents that can do different aspects of this content generation, but you also need the right source data. If you haven't got the right source data, and sometimes the right source data is not that easy automatically to get because it can be in the public domain, but if it's in the public domain, you need to know where it is. You can't just use the existing internal knowledge of a large language model because you need to source it. You need to footnote it where this information is coming from without any hallucinations. But sometimes this data would exist within an enterprise in different places. So if you don't have the right source information, the quality of the content you generate, just like as a human being, without the right source information, you won't generate high quality content. You need to do that, right? So all of these things need to come into place before you're able to have a proper content generation system.
I mean, I love those points because I think when a lot of people from the outside look in, they figure, well, you have all these great models. Why is it so hard to go and apply them and get really great outcomes? They think it's going to be an overnight solution. And I think what you're saying is that, and a lot of it comes down to solving for the data streams, make sure that they're in order, that there's
Yeah,
connectivity there. That integration work is hard, right? I think
yeah,
getting that done is a prerequisite. Then you need different people in the room. You need the data scientists, but then you also need the domain experts to come together.
yeah,
And then these are not simple prompt engineering calls. You need the correct prompt
yeah,
engineering, but you then need the right context to bring into the model at the right time. So right context at the right time. And then I imagine it's a series of calls, not a single call. And
yeah,
then you need the answer generated in the type of way that is going to be helpful downstream to the people that are, need decision support, right? And so to me, it seems like there's a great bit of plumbing and integration that needs to happen. And then there needs to be a beautiful application layer that is taking large
yes,
language models as the core technology, but building on top and building in top for the particular workflow or use case that the technology needs to be applied to. That resonates with me because it's not a simple problem. It's extraordinarily complex. It's just when done
yeah,
well, when the application layer really works well, it's able to do maybe more of the work that people are doing, or at least help them out. But it's
yeah.
it's not an easy problem to solve. It seems like.
And Ankur, can I ask you back, like, because you're
So
absolutely
build.
right about,
Mhm.
sorry, I just want to ask you back also the same question, right? Because you're
No,
also
please go
working
ahead.
in this kind of area,
Mhm.
right? Which is, you absolutely are right. You need the workflow. You need to understand the current user experience and the new user experience you want to create. So how do you go about, say somebody wants to create a content generation system? What do you think are the right steps to go about doing this?
I think the first big thing is always making sure that you have proper awareness of the problems and where technology
Yeah,
could be applied to solve those problems, right? But you can't go at it from like, okay, well, we have this great technology, let's go see where we can slap it on. It has to be driven from
yeah,
what are the types of problems that the people in these roles face, right? And it could be that you start in one specific area. There's a particular type of high volume decision that gets made over and over again. It's fairly simple and straightforward, but it's taking time away because it just requires a human to do today. And so you start with something that's what I'd say is more solvable, but there's high volume. So basically, spending the time and
yes,
effort to tackle the problem is worthwhile, right? You don't want to tackle something that there isn't significant volume, no matter how simple it is, because it may not move the needle enough, right? So you have to find which set of problems are solvable, A, and then B, have some ROI if you were to solve them. And then I think it's
yeah,
trying to figure out who are the people that need to be involved in the build that needs to happen. So typically it's going to be the domain experts, data scientists.
yeah,
It might also be other business people that are making the decision of whether to go and bring on an external vendor or to keep it in house, and they're making decisions on the legal and compliance, regulatory implications.
yeah,
So you need multiple stakeholders in the room, but then you at least have what I would say is you have a basically a working team, right? A team that's
yeah,
able to kind of come up with the right playbook. And then I think what needs to happen is you need to make sure that all the different pieces that matter are in order. So do you have the
yeah,
proper access to the data streams you'll need? And if not, how do you
yeah,
create those integrations? The second bit is, okay, once the integrations are done, it's typically the ask that we have of customers is have the domain experts document how they go about making decisions. So where do they bring enough context in? How do they ultimately make the decisions? Do we have examples of those prior decisions? Because that's exactly what needs to be passed to the data scientists, because the data
yeah,
scientists will be able to say, okay, these are the things you look at. These are the steps that we need to kind of break the problem into. And then they align the large language model into a series of calls with the right context. And then what you do is you have the data scientists build a solution and then evaluate that
yeah,
routinely with the domain experts to make sure that there is good
yeah,
alignment with the model and the problem that needs to get solved. And if all of that works well, like that proof of concept is working well, then you start introducing the software into the exact process that the people are going through, maybe providing them some decision
yeah,
support. But it's always trust and verify. So the people in those roles still look at every single decision. They're
yeah,
reviewing the recommendation from the model, and until there's internal trust that's built in by the people in these roles, you cannot go and like really move some of the workflow to the AI. But the future state is some of the simple workflow can be done with the AI, or at least supported by the AI, and then people are spending less time. But this could take, it could take 6 to 9 months to
Yeah,
properly do. But you need the right people in the room, bought in on this endeavor in order for this to be successful. And it's hard because I think what I see is that smaller, faster startups, they have the technologists in house, but they don't have the capital and they don't have the domain expertise. And then the
yeah.
larger organizations, they have regulatory, legal, and compliance to worry about. They do have domain experts. They have a lot of problems, but they might not have the, what I would say is like the fast moving technologists, right? And so it's like, how do you connect those
Yeah,
pieces? That's a major challenge that I see in the market today.
I completely agree with you, Ankur. And one of the things that I have
I'm
seen,
curious. I think based on your experience, yeah.
yeah, go ahead with your question.
Well, I'd love for you to weigh in on that because I have a follow up question. I'm curious, sort
Yeah,
of how what areas you feel like companies similar to yours or your company have done a good job with, like in terms of
yeah,
adopting AI, and then what open areas remain. But yeah, would love any comments or feedback you have on what
yeah.
I have just conveyed as well.
I mean, what you have said exactly is my experience working internally, but also working with clients in terms of you need all those pieces of the puzzle to get right. One other thing I have noticed as people have gone about working with generative AI is especially in 2023 when all this hit, it was the year of the pilot or the year of the proof of concept. And now people are thinking about what do we do
Yeah.
at scale? But when they are thinking about doing at scale, they are also focusing on things, maybe rightly so, in what I call adjacent innovation, which is we have this capability X now. We create this document. How can we add a little bit of generative AI on top and make it do slightly better? Or I am doing this kind of analytics today. I don't change the analytics, but I add a little bit of a chatbot or a generative AI on the top, so I can call the natural language, use the natural language to call the analytics, right? So it's adjacent innovation. Many cases it's helpful. Some cases it's like putting lipstick on a pig. It's not going to make it better because you haven't fundamentally taken the power of AI and generative AI to transform what you can do, right? And part of this, the challenge that I see at organizations is when you have large organizations, they have legacy functions. You could have a marketing function or a medical function or a clinical development function. They are used to doing things a particular way, and they are not set up to completely disrupt how they do it, because maybe they can do the same thing with half the people or get the same number of people to do much more. It's very difficult to disrupt that. It's also one could call the innovators dilemma. So then they think, I have this new technology, I put a little bit of it on top and try to improve what I'm doing. But what is likely to happen is when there are small companies, like in the pharma, you could have emerging biopharma. They are small companies. They are coming up with
Mhm.
new molecules, but they haven't built this huge marketing or medical or clinical development or other functions. So what they could do, and this is the example of Moderna with its OpenAI partnership, when it says that we are
Mhm.
going to launch all these molecules, but without hiring 100,000 people, but very small number of people. So you could actually have a situation where the smaller companies could say, I'm going to launch a drug. I'm not going to build a full medical function or a business insights and analytics function.
Mhm.
I'm going to outsource this to a AI system rather than outsource this to a vendor or offshore to a low cost location.
Mhm.
I could outsource it to an AI system that is run by a small number of people, because you could do that to business insights and analytics. You could do that for medical. So, for example, when a company launches a new drug, it needs to communicate the value of the drug and the unmet need in the disease through what they call medical science liaisons or other ways to get the message across. Today, it's possible that you could create a virtual expert, even in video, that could communicate the right messages and the right information to patients, to other physicians when they need it, rather than sending them emails or messages, right? So, if you have that kind of system, you could be able to communicate your message completely differently with half the people that you have, uh, or less than half that you had before, and you might be able to get those people to do something else. So this kind of transformation is coming, probably in not next year, but in the next 2 to 3 years. But people need to be thinking about that. They need to prepare for it now. Otherwise, there is a huge potential for disruption for incumbents trying to do things that the way they have been doing it for years and years.
So to build on that, it seems like a lot of the innovation is going to come from smaller companies that are able to move faster, right? And I think I think this isn't surprising in some ways, because if you look at drug discovery, big pharma tends to innovate less from within. Certainly, they have R&D departments; they do spend time,
Yeah,
but a lot of the newer work and some of the pioneering work happens through acquisitions and partnering with maybe faster moving, more innovative, smaller companies. Do you think that the rest of the adoption of AI in some of these maybe like productivity type of workflows, that it's going to trickle in the same way, which is that these smaller, more entrepreneurial companies are going to adopt the newer emerging technology even for productivity faster, and then eventually some of the larger players start innovating as well. And to me, I think I see like why and how that can happen, because a larger players, big pharma, they it's a nice to have productivity improvements in a
yeah,
way, because they have really great businesses that throw out a lot of cash, and they can spend on bodies to go and deal with some of the pain points. Whereas a smaller company, you're just more cash strapped, so you have to look at technology as a way to level the playing field, and so you're more open to adopting newer ways of working, and you also have less legacy
yeah.
process to kind of adhere to. And so a lot of the innovation is still going to, and adoption is still going to happen with smaller companies, it seems like. But I'm curious if you're seeing something similar, or maybe you want to refute that view. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I would agree with you, Ankur. It is going to come from smaller companies first, or where they don't have legacy systems, where they are cash strapped, and maybe they are okay with an output that may not be as great as 10 people doing it, but good enough for them to do it now. That's going to happen. But I also think that large pharma is also under pressure because there is more competition, more molecules coming out. Payer pressure is there, which means that time to peak sales is getting delayed. So they have to make the same amount of money, but with lower cost, which means that they have to seriously think about how do you get to market faster? How do you do your clinical development faster? How do you ensure that you're investing in the right assets and the right evidence plan so that you are successful from a regulatory perspective, you are successful from a reimbursement and price perspective, and all of these decisions you can use AI to learn from all of the historical data to make better decisions, and this is possible today. And similarly, when you are on the market, you can communicate your messages better, you can communicate your messages faster, you can prepare better content, and you can do it with a fraction of the investment that you do today, as long as you think about AI systems and not just chatbot on top of something that you're already doing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think that people need to think about the whole rather than just try to slap something on. Let's maybe talk about end user outcomes, right? So,
Yeah,
and I think there's drug discovery, of course, newer drug
yeah,
discovery, faster drug discovery is really important like I would say healthcare problems that exist today, but there's also a lot of talk about longevity and kind of the future
yeah,
state of healthcare and how it can improve the quality of lives well into our later years. But maybe let's separate that from the productivity portions, right? So
yeah,
typically what we hear is like clinical decision support, coming back to that topic, reimbursements, prior authorizations, more
yes,
of the other areas that are maybe
yeah,
more are going to see a productivity boost. I'm curious,
yeah.
what are some of the bad outcomes that you've typically seen or heard about in this space? And then are we seeing improvements there? Because and I think there are two aspects, right? There's a cost associated with maybe lower productivity in these workflows. But then there's also just how long it takes to get through these workflows and how it impacts the actual like patients and end users.
I think I'll just give you a direct example. This is a health system example rather than a pharma example. So I live in the UK, right? And when I have to call the doctor or see the primary care physician or the GP, or I need to first call a number called 111. And when I call that number, I have to hold on for a little bit. Then I get through to someone. Then they ask me a bunch of questions. I answer those questions. Then they say, okay, wait, someone else will call you. And they call me in like 3 hours and they ask me another set of questions and they go through it. And then at the end of the day, say like, yeah, that's fine. You don't need to see a doctor. You can wait for another week. And if you get worse, call me back. This thing, if we had an AI system, it could ask you those questions. It could ask you as a human being those questions, and you don't have to wait on the line for 3 hours for it to call you back. You could immediately get it to ask you those questions, do the triage, and then decide whether you see a physician or not. So this absolutely productivity improvement. Day one, you could do it. You could reduce the cost in the NHS, or you could repurpose these people who are taking the calls to do other things because there's a huge demand in the health service for doing many other things, right? This could be done now and it would improve the patient experience humongously, right? Same thing if you're talking
Yeah.
about the US system, when you do the prior authorization, this could be automated because there are certain forms you need to fill or certain criteria you need to go through. You do not need to like waste a lot of time on a lot of this paperwork, etc. These could be automated now, and they are not like that sensitive use cases because you're still going through some kind of logic and doing a triage on this, right? So there is a huge potential for productivity improvements with AI. Now, coming back to clinical decision support, right? This is more complicated, but again, there's huge
Mhm.
potential for improvement. When you take any disease area and I would take cancer or oncology, you could take immunology. There are many, many different treatment choices available for a physician. And any single physician has read only a certain number of articles and has seen, maybe they have seen hundreds or even thousands of patients, but a small number of patients. And when we look at the data, we find that for the same kind of patient, different physicians could make different decisions in terms of treatment choice, in terms of treatment sequencing. So if you are a breast cancer or non-small cell lung cancer, you may have 10 different options, and people may choose different options, first, second, third, for that patient. And we don't know if that option is the optimal choice. When we look at the outcomes for different treatment sequences, we find variations in outcomes. So there is absolute room for improvement in terms of survival of cancer patients or quality of life for what you call immunocompromised or immunology patients like in psoriasis or rheumatoid
Mhm.
arthritis. And here AI can help because you have a lot of real world data and you could use AI to predict treatment response, predict treatment progression, and with generative AI, in fact, do this even better by maybe having a single multimodal foundation model that could predict the next event, and you could see that progression happen, and then use this for clinical decision support. So you can say, if I have this patient X, given their genotype, phenotype, and their preferences, maybe this is the right treatment choice. This is technically within reach, but there are many, many other barriers that stop that from happening today.
Yeah. It's very interesting because I think, like if you, the word you used earlier was triage, and I think that's exactly
Yeah.
right. There are certain decisions or straightforward that you shouldn't have to be on the call for 3 hours or wait 3 hours to get. And I think that's exactly the support that people need. Talk about AI being this great productivity boost for people. People in these roles shouldn't have to make decisions on very simple inquiries like that, right? And it might not be
yeah,
simple to the patient, but because the provider has seen enough of those inquiries, they know exactly how it should be
yeah,
dealt with. So software can learn that, AI based software can learn that and then
yeah,
help. And so now the human operators that are on the phones or doing chat, they're spending more time with the more complex cases, which is exactly how it
yeah,
should work, right? Not every single
yeah,
case is a burning fire. And I think that's a huge area. Prior authorization is more administrative, right? Do you
yeah,
meet certain criteria? Based on that criteria, should it be authorized or not? And maybe not all prior authorization work.
yeah,
It can be automated, but a lot of it can be. And if something gets rejected and you want to appeal it, that's when the
yeah,
human operator should spend more time kind of going through the appeal decision, as opposed to kind of doing the more straightforward kind of black and white ones. And then clinical decision support. I think you touched on this here. It's not to have AI make the final decision. In most cases, I would
yeah,
say organizationally, because of compliance and legal and regulatory considerations, you don't want AI to make any final call, but
yeah,
the individuals in these roles should have an easier time getting to the right decision, maybe because some context that's relevant for them is being pushed to them. Maybe there's a recommendation from the AI. I think what you'll
yeah,
also see is that over time, some decisions that are being made by the AI are extraordinarily good. And it might be around a particular cluster of like inquiries, right? Or
yeah,
requests that come in where AI is so good because it's seen so much of this and it's learned from human decisions. And so for that, AI can kind of be very confident. Maybe you do automate that in some future state. And then human operators work on the more
yeah,
complex edge cases. Think of situations that we haven't seen a cluster or density of queries come
yeah,
in. And so you can kind of design this, but it takes time. But I think thoughtful, intentional design of AI to help people do more work more quickly and then help triage some of the requests that are coming in. That's sort of the future state I see. I think there are reasons why it makes it more complex than it should be. Um, but I guess my follow-up question, Raja, and I know I kind of went on this for a little bit, just kind of reiterating some of the points, is like
yeah.
how much is like legal compliance regulation a blocker to some of the changes that need to happen versus like change management and organizational friction. And then maybe the last bucket I would say is like maybe there's like lack of awareness on the technology side and like how to do
Yeah.
things. I mean, how much do each of those things factor into maybe the challenges of bringing some of this technology to the forefront?
I personally think that the legal compliance is an issue, but less of an issue if we get the other things right. In the sense that if people understand the technology, and there is not a good understanding of the technology at all levels in the organizations, all the way down from the junior staff to the most senior executives, they're trying, and it takes time to understand this, but there is still a lack of true understanding of the technology. There is also internal organizational challenges in terms of silos of organization, in terms of data silos, etc., that sometimes stop things happening. So yes, there are legal challenges, there are compliance challenges. You need to understand GDPR in the EU, you need to understand HIPAA in the US, and different kinds of regulations. But those could be understood if the organization really wants to do things in a compliant way and things that address bias, hallucination, security, IP, all of these things. We know what some of these challenges are, and we know how to address this. If the organization gets its act together, gets the understanding right, and you have the right people driving these things, then you can address these challenges that are there. So I
Mhm.
don't see that those as insurmountable. It's often the organizational dynamics that makes things slower than it ought to be.
Very interesting. And I love that perspective because sometimes you hear the opposite, which is like um, the people on the company, like on the teams at the companies, they say we would love to move faster, we would love to be able to do this, but we don't have clarity on the legal regulatory front, so we can't touch it. And I think
Yeah,
what you're highlighting is that there are ways to work around that, but getting the kind of the business and the technology side right first is super critical. So I'm curious, among those teams, the business and the technology teams, who's pushing for this adoption more, and who's resisting, or does it maybe differ based on the particular organization? But I'm curious, sort of how adoption is happening and trickling through, and perhaps maybe you could speak to like the way that
Yeah.
POCs and pilots get done. Is it coming from an innovation team? Is it coming from the technologists are pushing for this, or is it the people on the business or business operations side that say, "Hey, like there's this new technology, can we do something with it to help alleviate some of the problems we're facing on the business
Yeah.
operations?"
I think if you look at large organizations, it's different between small organizations and large organizations. When you look at large organizations, what happens is there are many different functions and many different stakeholders. And you could have some situations where their stakeholders are skeptical and they don't want to do anything or they will resist change, right? It doesn't depend on whether they're business or technology. We can even find people within the data science space who were resisting generative AI because they were so used to the decision tree based models, which still work very well, by the way, that they would say, no, this is nothing. This is just a summarization tool, and we don't trust it. It hallucinates, it has bias, and so on. So we can't use this. It's not such a big change. And this ontology based NLP guys, and I believe in ontologies too, by the way, but they said, no, this can't
Mhm.
work. And now they are sort of coming around to it when they see the promise of it. But there are also technical people who see this and they shift quickly. And same on the business side, some people shift quickly,
Mhm.
some people take time. So it probably depends upon what your personality is. If you are like a quick innovator, first adopter, or a denier, or a etc. It depends on that. And I try to characterize them by: are you an enthusiast? Or are you like a sort of an enthusiast? You want to try stuff, but you want to know that it has worked for somebody else first, like a fast follower, versus a skeptic who
Yeah.
really wants to it to be proven, and then a denier is not happening. I don't need to worry about it, right? So you can get this kind of personas that you work with to make things happen that you go through. But there's another dynamic that's at work, which is different from this, which is in a large organization, different people want to shine and they want to own things. So there may be like 50 divisions in a company, and they all want to do their own Gen AI stuff, which is fine. Because you want people, and the advantage of that is you have many experiments running, and people could come up with ideas, and then some of that could be successful, right? The flip side is sometimes organizations have a very reaction. We need to control everything. We can't let all of these people do their own stuff because we're going to duplicate everything. And we should have a central team that collates all these use cases, and we'll go through a process where we prioritize the use cases and then we do it. There's an advantage to this, so you can avoid duplication, but on the other hand, you slow up the process and you gum up everything, and you don't have the capacity to go after every use case that's out there, right? So I think there needs to be some kind of a balance between the two, where you have a system which allows that decentralized innovation to happen in the organization, but then there is some governance where you don't want 50 SLR, systematic literature to review tools, or a protocol generation tools in the organization, right? You want like one or two or whatever that's there. So I don't have the perfect answer to this, but I think there needs to be some kind of an organizational dynamic that allows for decentralized experimentation, but production that happens more centrally at scale.
I love the analogies and stories and the terms that you've used. Enthusiastic, yes; fast follower, skeptic, and deniers, right? And I think I think you're right. You could have that spectrum even in technology, because people come from different technology backgrounds, and sometimes they resist something that is new, something that's they're less familiar with, in favor of what they do know, what has worked well, right?
Yeah,
And I think it's equally problematic if you move too fast and you're like super gung ho. Let's scrap all of traditional ML and decision trees, and let's just move
yeah,
everything to Gen AI, because I don't think that's the right answer. I think
yeah,
there's so
yeah,
much good about traditional machine learning. In fact, I tout how great traditional machine learning is for many reasons. I think you have more explainability, you have confidence
yeah,
scores, need to create proxies for it with generative
yeah,
AI in order for generative AI to be truly effective. Because if you don't know when to trust the AI, you don't know when to like skip parts and trust it, versus like when you should be hyper aware and vigilant because it's likely hallucinated, right?
yeah,
So there's a lot of good
yeah,
paradigms drawn for traditional ML when you look at generative AI. And I think On the business side, it's similar, which is that some see generative AI as a means to go and advance their career, which is great. They're like early
Yeah.
adopters. They're known for that. They're the ones that bring change about, and others that are they don't they have more maybe more fear of career risk. That it's riskier to try something new, and they'll kind of move in that direction if their peers or counterparts are moving that way. And it's basically getting people comfortable enough with a good degree of skepticism, because I think that keeps you vigilant of the areas that this could fail, right? You don't want spectacular failures. That's something that's really harmful to everybody involved in this broader industry. And I think your description of the innovation team, I think, is really helpful, because I've seen kind of what you're describing, which is sometimes innovation teams are the gatekeepers, but because they're the gatekeepers and they have so much to consider and the technology moving super fast, it slows everything down. Whereas if you have decentralized teams, there might be some duplicative effort that's happening, but they're able to move more quickly, right? And so
Yeah.
it's a balance. I think it's a balancing act, and I think organizations will have to figure this out. And every single organization operates differently. It's something we're seeing firsthand with some of our customers today. So I think that insight, I think, is super helpful. And I'm curious sort of how it works at IQVIA, the way you're set up. If you could maybe speak about that.
Yeah, I mean, we are all going through the same kind of challenge. I can't really talk too much confidentially about what we do because that's
Sure.
our secret sauce of what we are developing. But generally, I think we have faced the same challenge. But generally, in the company, that there is a recognition of the huge potential of AI, and we bring a lot of capabilities internally. We bring domain expertise, we bring data, we also bring AI expertise, and we want to make change happen. So I think I have some wonderful colleagues who are really passionate about this, and we are working together to figure this things out. We may not move as fast as I would like to, but I also understand that we need to move on this in a measured, considerate manner, and I'm sure that we will be bringing like some really interesting and path-breaking innovation over the next months and years.
Great, I appreciate that insight. And then, how are you looking at external vendors? And by vendors, I mean
Yeah,
startups. These could be partners of the hyperscalers like AWS,
yeah,
Azure, GCP, directly with OpenAI or Anthropic, consulting firms.
yeah,
So I'm wondering how you're looking at the kind of the vendor ecosystem and leveraging some of
yeah.
what they bring versus keeping this very tightly controlled with your internal teams.
This is a very good question, Ankur, because I've been thinking about this, and I have somewhat of uh, a framework or a framing that I actually watched this in a session that was put out by Weights and Biases, and there was a Yannick Kilcher, a podcaster, he presented on this, and then I sort of took it from him, and I have this framing of the things. I have like a four-quadrant thing, which is one is with generative AI, there are the infrastructure providers, like the cloud providers and the GPU providers. We are not going to build it. We're going to get it externally. It's the NVIDIAs and the Microsofts and the AWS or Google Cloud, IBMs of the world that you would work with to get that. Then there is the second, which I would say model access or foundation model building. Of course, we're not going to build a large language model or a general purpose diffusion model ourselves. We're going to access that through tokens, but if we could access it from OpenAI, we could get open source models, do clouds, Anthropic, etc. We could use it, but we may also want to take some of this and build bespoke foundation models depending on the use case, because not every use case requires a fine tuning or a foundation model. But potentially, you could build a foundation model on connected patient data that could be different from the original like base foundation model, right? And here again, we would want to partner with someone to do it if we were to do it. I don't know if you're going to do it or a company would do it, but if they did it, you would want to partner with somebody who brings that strong model building expertise, because you have to do hyperparameter tuning, you have to do the right tokenization, you would need to think about parallel GPU infrastructure, all of these things. There's no point recreating that knowledge. You would work with somebody who has that knowledge to then do something like that, right? Then the third piece, with lower level of complexity maybe, but still complex, is to build this agentic AI or multi-agent systems. Here, we would want to do a lot of this in-house, but we would still want to partner with others on if somebody has the right framework. then why not work with them to
Mhm.
get the right framework to build some of these capabilities? And we could look to other partners. They could be startups or they could be bigger players like, say, Databricks or maybe Crew.ai or LangChain. There could be different kinds of providers of this or domain-specific providers of this that one could work with to build this thing out. I'm not giving these names because they are the preferred partners, but these are examples of partners that you would have, right? And then you get
Mhm.
into we have this current product, we want to do a chatbot on top, very quick things. Many of these things we could do relatively quickly internally, but then again, it depends on the use case, right? Like systematic literature review. As a company, do you want to build your own capability, or do you just get a startup or somebody who is doing that and you do that? Or writing protocols or etc. You could decide this is something we could do internally because we could run this quickly. Or you could say, do I really need to do it? Can I get this off the shelf? I think every organization has to make that decision based on what they think helps them move faster, cheaper, better, and so on.
I love that breakdown. I think it's gonna be very helpful to our audience who are going through the same decisions right now around, what should they do in-house versus external, right? I think that's going to be super important to get that mix right. Because I think right now, it's very confusing. Like, what do you actually do with your internal
Yeah,
team, and then where can you get help from external vendors? And I think since it's moving super fast, you don't even know which are the right vendors to consider,
yeah.
and then also how much better are they at what they do versus just doing it in-house, right? So I think it's pretty confusing for a lot of buyers out there today.
Absolutely. And the question is like, which vendor do we partner with on what? Even that, you require some advice, right? And we have been going through this process. So we have some perspectives on how do you go through this process. So there are many, many decisions to be made. And you should not do everything yourself because sometimes you get benefits, not just from like scale, but somebody is doing it for many companies. They may have certain knowledge and capabilities and innovation that would be better than if you're doing it only for one time for one use case, right? So you have to think about the right balance there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's right. It's like, what problems are more universal maybe to the industry, that you would benefit from working with a vendor on because they're going to have that breadth of awareness, versus what are items that are so specific to the company and the way that you work that you should use your internal team to do. And I think there's kind of that balance, right? So,
yeah,
for example, I know a lot of companies are building their own RAG applications.
yeah,
As simple as that may sound, and building RAG applications sometimes might make sense building internally. But if an external vendor had a really great RAG solution because they were able to build out like better chunking, they were able to build better embeddings, maybe they had better
yeah,
ways of dealing with hallucinations and providing more explainability and observability, like all the things that are essential to making RAG work well in production for high
yeah,
volume usage,
yeah,
then maybe you use an external vendor if what they provide is so much better than like the simple vanilla RAG application
yeah.
that any kind of internal team could do, right? So these are the trade-offs I think a lot of buyers will have to kind of consider in the months to come.
You're absolutely right. And the flip side, sometimes you might have very specific data or data types or use cases where a general purpose RAG, which is very good for many, many use cases, may not be very specific for you. And then you need something specific, but you need that balance. You absolutely need to get, like, if there are things that are available at scale from a specialized vendor who has really done this well, then absolutely you should do it. Don't build it yourself. But then if there are, but you can test it, right? You can test it if it works enough, and then you need to do something customized,
Yeah.
then you do customized. Yeah,
Well, Raja, it's been amazing having you on the
yeah,
show. I think your insights have been incredible. I know they're going to be very valuable to the audience. So just want to thank you for your time here, and would love to do a follow-up episode in a year or so, because the space is
absolutely.
moving super fast. I'm sure there's going to be great learnings, but it seems like you're at the forefront of applying this technology. You have really great frameworks that are going to be helpful to our audience as they try to figure out sort of what to do next in this ecosystem. So just want to say thanks for being on the show and look forward to a conversation in the future.
Thank you very much, Ankur, for this opportunity. Really happy and enjoyed talking to you.